Hello, welcome to Stephen King Reviews number 31, Blaze. Here is the 31st book I read and 7th Richard Bachman book. Big Mother. At 6'7" and just under 300 pounds, Clay Blaisdell is one big mother, and his capers were just small time until he met George Rackley. George introduced him to 100 cons and one big idea: kidnapping the child of rich parents. The Gerards are filthy rich, and the last twig on the family tree could be worth millions. There's only one big problem. By the time the big deal goes down, the brains of the partnership is dead. Or is he? Now Blaze is running into the teeth of a howling storm, and the cops are closing in. He's got a baby as a hostage, and the crime of the century just turned into a race against time in the white hell of the Maine woods. He pulled off the crime of the century with a dead man. It's a bit bubblegum and cheesy, kind of forgettable in some ways, but I do remember mostly for it being a cute, beautiful, and surprisingly empathetic story. For horror factor, I gave it 6 out of 10, because the ghost of George does add a touch of horror, even if he's not exactly the most terrifying specter of a Stephen King novel. For story quality, I gave it 8 out of 10. It's an interesting and touching tale, for sure, with the bonus short story at the end being quite good as well. For suspense intensity, I gave it 10 out of 10, because while it's not very scary, it's definitely intense and thrilling. For memorable characters, I gave it 8 out of 10, because Blaze and his friends are quite unforgettable and very beautifully depicted characters of any Stephen King novel. So, with 6 out of 10 for horror factor, 8 out of 10 for story quality, 10 out of 10 for suspense intensity, and 8 out of 10 for memorable characters, the overall rating totals up to 32 out of 40. The short story at the end is dark and not bad, but the main story is pretty great. So, it definitely deserves a decent amount of praise. My final thoughts would be that while this is not my favorite King or Bachman book, it's pretty good, and it sits middle of the road for me, but overall, in a literary sense, it's quite brilliantly crafted. Now, what I will say, I just wanted to make sure I got the short story of this part executed properly. Memory, that was the title. I wanted to make sure I had that right. Stephen King's short story Memory appeared in Volume 7, November 4 of Tin House, the summer 2006 issue. It is the seed from which has grown a much longer tale, Duma Key, which Scribner will publish in early 2008. See, I didn't even know that. That's an interesting bit of fact. So, for the rest of the review, we will round off the backstory of Blaze. The last of the Richard Bachman novels, recently recovered and published for the first time, Stephen King's dark half may have saved the best for last. A fellow named Richard Bachman wrote Blaze in 1973 on an Olivetti typewriter, then turned the machine over to Stephen King, who used it to write Carrie. Bachman died in 1985, cancer of the pseudonym. But in late 2006, King found the original typescript of Blaze among his papers at the University of Maine's Fogler Library. How did this get here? He wondered, and decided that with a little revision, it ought to be published. Blaze is the story of Clayton Blaisdell Jr., of the crimes committed against him, and the crimes he commits, including his last, the kidnapping of a baby heir worth millions. Blaze has been a slow thinker since childhood, when his father threw him down the stairs, and then threw him down again. After escaping an abusive institution for boys when he was a teenager, Blaze hooks up with George, a seasoned criminal who thinks he has all the answers. But then George is killed, and Blaze, though haunted by his partner, is on his own. He becomes one of the most sympathetic criminals in all of literature. This is a crime story of surprising strength and sadness, with a suspenseful current sustained by the classic working of fate and character, a tout as riveting as Stephen King's The Girl Who Loved Tom Gordon. During the years 1966 to 1973, Stephen King was actually two men. Stephen King wrote and sold horror stories to magazines such as Cavalier and Atom, while Richard Bachman wrote a series of novels that would not be published until the early 1980s and were then collected as the Bachman books. Bachman died of pseudonym cancer in 1985, shortly after another of his novels, Thinner, was attributed to Stephen King. But a sixth Bachman novel, The Regulators, surfaced in 1995 and was published simultaneously with Stephen King's Desperation, to which it bore a weird resemblance. Blaze, both brutal and sensitive, was the last novel written during Bachman's early period. It is his legacy. King's proceeds from Blaze will be donated to the Haven Foundation, which supports freelance artists. And there you have it. That's a review of Blaze fully in a nutshell, and I think I did it quite just. So hopefully you enjoyed it, and until next time, I'm Super Comic Guru Alucard. Peace out, matane. Till next time.